When you look around the gym, you'll see a lot of people hammering away at pull-ups, lat pull-downs, and maybe some rows. And those are fantastic exercises, don't get me wrong. But if you take a closer look at their backs, what do you notice? Wide on top, maybe, but flat through the lower lats. That V-taper doesn't flow all the way down because most people completely skip the lower lat emphasis. And let me tell you, if you're ignoring that, you're leaving a ton of aesthetic and strength potential on the table. Now, why does this happen? It's not because lower lats are impossible to target. It's because most folks go straight for the big showy movements, the heavy rows and the pull-ups, and those don't do a great job of biasing the lower fibers. To really get those lower lats to pop, you have to be precise with your exercise selection and execution. Otherwise, you'll be training the upper and mid back over and over, and your lower lats just sit there understimulated. So what are we actually looking at here? Think about the anatomy. The lats insert down at the pelvis and come up to attaching to the upper arm. When you row with your elbows way out, you're biasing the traps and rear delts. When you pull straight down with wide grip, you're smashing the upper lats and tear is major. But when you get those elbows tucked in and you drive them down toward your hips rather than just straight back, that's when the lower lats get lit up. It's not about moving the weight from A to B. It's about directing the line of pull so it matches the fibers you're trying to grow. And here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Lower lat exercises aren't flashy. They're not going to let you pile on 3 plates and look like a monster in the gym. They require control, patience, and lighter loads. Straight arm pull downs with a hip hinge, close grip underhand pull downs, one arm kneeling cable rows where you pull low toward the hip. All of these look boring compared to heaving up a heavy barbell row. But the boring stuff builds the detail. And when you stick with it, 6 months down the road, your back doesn't just look wide, it looks full, 3-dimensional, and powerful. The truth is, 99% of lifters will keep skipping these. They'll tell themselves the heavy basics are enough, or they'll say, I just want width. That's fine. But if you want to separate yourself from the crowd, if you want that back that doesn't just look like a plank of wood, but actually has depth all the way down to the waistline, you can't skip the lower lat work. Because the guys with the best backs, they don't. Most lifters neglect the lower lats, and that's why their backs look flat. And it's not because they don't want a better looking back. Everyone wants a big, thick 3D back. It's because people follow the path of least resistance in training. They pick the exercises that look cool, feel heavy, and stroke the ego, instead of the ones that actually hit the areas they're missing. So what happens? You walk into a gym, you see guys rowing big weight, doing pull-ups with a couple of plates strapped on, hammering away at the lat pull-down with the widest grip possible. And if you look at their backs, they're wide up top, sure, but from mid-back down to the waist, flat. No sweep, no density, no taper that flows all the way down. That's the dead giveaway that lower lats are being skipped. Why does this happen? First, there's a knowledge gap. A lot of lifters don't even realize that the lats aren't just one big slab of muscle that you hit the same way every time. The lats have multiple regions, and the fiber direction changes. So when you train them, different angles and grips shift the emphasis. The lower portion of the lats, the part that really creates that dramatic V-taper running down into the waist, requires movements where the elbows come in close to the body and drive down toward the hips. But most lifters don't know that, or if they do, they don't care enough to apply it. Second, the culture of lifting plays a big role. People glorify the heavy basics, which is fair because barbell rows and weighted pull-ups absolutely build a lot of back muscle. But they don't specifically bias the lower lats much. What they mostly build is upper lats, traps, and rhomboids. That's why you see tons of guys who have this thick upper back shelf, but then it just tapers off into nothing as you look down toward the waistline. It's not that they're not training hard, it's that they're not training smart for the lower lat region. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. The exercises that best hit the lower lats aren't flashy. Nobody's going to be impressed when they see you doing a strict, controlled, straight arm pull down or a low cable row with your elbow tucked into your side. Nobody claps when you do kneeling one-arm cable pulls to the hip with a moderate load. These don't move as much weight, they don't let you grunt and slam plates around, and they don't give you that I'm a beast look on the gym floor. And that right there is why most lifters never stick with them. They want to look strong, not necessarily look anatomically complete. But here's the irony. The guys with the most complete, most jaw-dropping backs, the ones that look full from traps all the way down to the waist, They're the ones who trained their lower lats consistently. They swallowed their pride, picked the movements that didn't let them max out their ego, and they just hammered them week after week. And when you compare them side by side to the average lifter, the difference is night and day. One back looks like a wide plank, the other looks like a winged 3D sculpture with depth and flow. Another thing that holds people back is this belief that the heavy basics are enough to hit everything. And that's just not true. The human body doesn't work like that. Yes, heavy rows and pull-ups train a lot of musculature, but they are not magic catch-all exercise. Just because you're using big loads doesn't mean you're hitting every region optimally. If it were that simple, then everyone who did barbell rows would have complete detailed lower lats. But we all know that's not what we see in the gym. The evidence is literally walking around shirtless on every beach, lots of wide backs, very few with that deep taper all the way down. There's also the issue of effort allocation. People only have so much time and energy in the gym. And if they've already fried themselves with pull-ups, barbell rows, and deadlifts, by the time it's let detail work, they're gassed. So they skip it, or they throw in a half-hearted set of pull-downs at the end, check the box, and move on. But here's the thing. If you always skip the details, you'll always be missing the details in your physique. The lower lats don't just magically appear because you did heavy work. They appear when you deliberately train them week after week with focus and consistency. The tragedy is, lower lats are one of the biggest game changers for a physique. Think about it. Wide lats up top are impressive, but wide lats that sweep down into a narrow waist make you look carved out of stone. It exaggerates the V-taper, makes the torso look athletic, and completely transforms how your body looks from the back and even the front. If you're a bodybuilder, this is the difference between looking like pretty good versus looking pro level. And if you're just someone who wants to look great in a t-shirt, that lower lat thickness is what gives the shirt that powerful taper. So let's be clear, the reason most lifters' backs stay flat isn't because they don't work hard or because they don't want it bad enough. It's because they neglect the lower lat region, whether through ignorance, laziness, or ego. They don't prioritize it, so it never grows. If you want to separate yourself from the 99% who keep making this mistake, you've got to flip the script. Start taking the boring, less glamorous exercises seriously. Stick with them. Put them early enough in the session that you actually have energy for them. Treat them like they matter, because they do. And over time, your back won't just be wide, it'll be complete. And that's when people start noticing. Here's the thing about most people's back training: the exercises they love to do, the ones you see over and over in every gym, aren't actually built to bias the lower lats. They're great for building a big, wide, and strong upper back, but when it comes to that dense sweep down into the waistline, they mostly skip it. And the truth is, that's why so many backs end up looking incomplete. People think they're training their whole lat just because they're hammering pull-ups, wide grip pull-downs, and heavy rows. But what they're really doing is blasting the upper lats, traps, and rhomboids over and over, while the lower lats sit quietly in the background. Why does this happen? It comes down to biomechanics. The lats are a huge muscle, but they're not a uniform sheet that gets hit the same way with every movement. The fibers of the upper lats run in a different direction than the fibers of the lower lats. When you do a wide grip pull-up or pull-down, your elbows flare out, and the line of pull matches the upper fibers of the lats, and the tear is major. That's why you feel a lot of pump and stretch up near your armpits. But the lower fibers, the ones that insert way down near the pelvis and run up toward the arm, aren't in their best line of action in that movement. They're involved, sure, but they're not maximally loaded. Now let's take the classic barbell row. It's a staple, and for good reason. It builds a thick back. But what does it really bias? If you row with your elbows out, you're hammering mid-traps, rhomboids, and rear delts. If you row with elbows tucked in a bit more, you'll get more lats. But again, the motion tends to load the mid and upper lats, not the lowest fibers. Same with T-bar rows, dumbbell rows, even machine rows. Most lifters naturally pull the weight toward their chest or upper stomach, which once again lights up everything above the waistline but spares the lower lat region. And this is why lifters often think, well, I train back super hard, but I still don't see the detail I want. It's not that they're not training hard enough, it's that they're not training smart enough when it comes to targeting. The big lifts they're relying on just don't bias the lower lats effectively. And the problem is, because those lifts allow for heavy loading, they feel productive. You're sweating, you're straining, you're moving a lot of iron, so you assume everything must be covered. But if you look at the physique results, the flatness down low tells the real story. Here's a simple way to think about it. The lats are best trained when the elbow path follows the direction of the muscle fibers. For the lower lats, that means elbows tucked in close, driving down toward the hips, not just straight back. Very few of the popular ego-friendly back exercises naturally put you in that position. That's why the lower lats don't get much love in the average program. Another factor here is grip choice. Wide grips bias the upper lats and teres. Neutral or underhand grips, especially with closer hands, bias the lower lat fibers more. But how often do you see lifters doing underhand close grip pull downs versus the classic wide grip variation? Almost never. Why? Because wide grip looks cooler, feels tougher, and is what everyone else is doing. But if you're chasing complete development, you can't just follow the crowd. You've got to make technical decisions about grip, elbow path, and line of pull that align with the anatomy you're trying to grow. Now let's be fair, upper and mid-back training is still crucial. You absolutely should do your heavy rows and pull-ups. They're foundational. But don't kid yourself into thinking those lifts are the end-all be-all for lat development. They're not. They're broad strokes, not fine detail. And if all you ever do is broad strokes, your back ends up wide but flat like a billboard. It looks big from straight on, but when you see it from an angle, there's no 3D shape. The missing ingredient is always the lower lats. And this explains the physique imbalance we see everywhere. Tons of lifters look good from the front or upper back shots, but turn them around, look from the waist down, and there's no sweep, no flow. They've built the top of the V, but left the bottom half neglected, and that's entirely because the common heavy go-to exercises are great at hammering the top, but lousy at hitting the bottom. So the takeaway here isn't that those big lifts are bad. They're fantastic. The point is, if you're only relying on them, you're leaving a huge gap in your back development. You need to understand what those exercises bias and what they miss. Otherwise, you'll be forever stuck in the cycle of working hard, sweating buckets, moving mountains of weight, but still wondering why your back doesn't look complete. The exercises you choose and how you execute them determine whether the lower lats ever get the stimulus they need to grow. And since most lifters never make those adjustments, they never grow that region at all. So when you see people walking around with a flat lower back, don't assume they're lazy or don't train back enough. More often than not, they're crushing plenty of rows and pull-ups. They're just doing movements that bias the wrong regions. And unless you consciously correct that, you'll end up in the exact same boat. Strong, hard working, but with a back that looks unfinished. The lower lats don't respond to random pulling. They don't get built just because you're sweating through heavy rows and pull-ups. To make them grow, you need precision. Precision in exercise choice, precision in how you move, and precision in the path your elbows travel. And this is where most lifters fall apart. They'll say, I do tons of back work, so my lower lats must be covered. But that's not how muscles work. Muscles don't care about your effort. They care about mechanics. If the line of pull doesn't match the direction of the fibers, you can train until you're blue in the face, and those fibers won't be maximally stimulated. And with the lower lats, that principle is brutally clear. Let's break it down. The lats insert down near the pelvis and run up to attach into the humerus, the upper arm. For the lower fibers specifically, the most direct way to load them is to have your elbows tucked close to your body, pulling down and slightly back toward your hips. That's the motion that runs in line with those fibers. Compare that to flaring your elbows out and pulling up toward your chest. Totally different line of pull, and one that leaves the lower lats mostly out of the picture. That's why precision matters. It's not about just rowing or just pulling. It's about how you row, how you pull, and what direction you're driving the resistance. A good example is the straight arm pull down. Most people dismiss it because you can't load it crazy heavy, but the biomechanics are perfect for the lower lats. With a slight hip hinge, arms extended, and the pull going from overhead down toward your thighs, you're putting the lower fibers in their best position. But if you get sloppy bending the elbows too much, letting the shoulders shrug, or just yanking the bar down, suddenly the emphasis shifts to triceps, rear delts, or even upper back. The same exercise can either build the lower lats like crazy or miss them almost entirely, depending on precision. Another great example is the close grip underhand pull down. When you do this properly, tucking the elbows in, driving them down to your waist instead of flaring them out, you feel that deep contraction near the lower lat attachment. But watch how most people do it. They grab the bar, yank it to their upper chest, lean back like they're water skiing, and call it a rep. That's not lower lat training. That's a messy combo of biceps and momentum. Precision is what turns that same movement into a true lower lat developer. Cable and machine rows are the same story. If you're pulling high to your chest, you're biasing upper back. If you're pulling with elbows tucked into your side and the handle finishing near your belly button or even hips, now you're in lower lat territory. But again, you have to resist the urge to load up the stack and just heave it. The second you let the elbows flare or the second the handle starts drifting higher, you've lost that precision. And when you lose precision, the lower lats get skipped. Here's what makes this tough. Precision usually means lighter weights, more control, and stricter technique. And that feels boring compared to stacking plates on a barbell row and looking like a beast. But that's the trade-off. You either lift with your ego and build a partial back, or you lift with precision and build a complete one. The best backs you'll ever see were built with careful attention to detail. Guys who treated every rep like a skill, not just a chore. They weren't flailing around, they were moving with intention. Now, precision doesn't mean perfection overnight. It means you commit to refining your technique every session. You ask, where are my elbows going? Where do I feel the muscle working? Am I actually pulling in the direction of the fibers I'm trying to grow? You make small adjustments until the answer is yes. That's the work. And it's unglamorous. No one's clapping for you because you focused on keeping your elbows tucked. But 6 months later, when your back actually looks 3D instead of flat, that's when the payoff shows up. And let's not forget, precision isn't just about the concentric, the pulling part, it's also about the eccentric. Lower lats respond incredibly well to controlled stretching under load. If you're letting the weight yank you back into the start position, you're throwing away half the growth potential. A slow, deliberate stretch at the top of a pull-down or the end of a pull-down-like movement loads those fibers in their lengthened position. That's a massive growth signal, but only if you're precise enough to keep tension on the right muscle the whole way. So think about it. If your back is flat and your lower lats are missing, it's probably not because you're lazy. It's because you've been sloppy. You've been pulling heavy, but without the precision needed to bias the fibers that aren't naturally dominant. The upper back will always want to take over. It's stronger, it's easier, and it's more fun to load heavy. The lower lats require you to put your ego on hold and commit to doing it right. Precision is the price of entry if you actually want them to grow. And the beauty of this is that once you start training with that kind of precision, you'll notice the difference immediately. The pump shifts lower, the soreness sits deeper, and over time, the shape of your back changes. It goes from wide and flat to wide and full with that sweep that makes the waist look smaller and the torso look more powerful. That's the reward for precision, and it's one most lifters never cash in on simply because they don't train with the detail it requires. Lower lat work isn't glamorous. It doesn't get you the biggest plates on the bar. It doesn't make you look like the strongest guy in the gym. And it's not going to draw a crowd of people watching you grind out a heavy set. And that's exactly why almost nobody does it consistently. The reality is that lower lat training is built on movements that are controlled, lighter in load, and demand patience. They don't stroke your ego. They don't feel like PR chasing. They feel methodical. But here's the thing. The boring stuff builds the detail. And it's the detail that separates the average back from the kind of back that looks like a 3D sculpture carved into your frame. Most lifters are obsessed with the showy lifts, the heaviest barbell rows, the weighted pull-ups, the T-bar rows where you slam plates on until the bar bends. And all of those lifts are valuable, don't get me wrong. But when you look at the best backs in the world, what makes them stand out isn't just the sheer size on top. It's the completeness. It's how the muscle flows from the traps down to the waist, without gaps, without flat spots. That fullness doesn't come from maxing out the flashy lifts. It comes from grinding through the precise, detail-oriented work that nobody else wants to do. Take the straight arm pull down, for example. From the outside, it looks like a warm-up exercise. You're not bending your elbows, you're not moving huge weights, and if you do it right, you're using controlled tempos and focusing on feel. People walk past that and think that's a beginner exercise or that's for pump work. Wrong, that's a lower lat builder in disguise, but because it doesn't make you look powerful when you're doing it, 99% of people skip it. Same with kneeling one-arm cable rows to the hip. Nobody's filming themselves doing that for Instagram, but that's the type of movement that creates thickness where most lifters are missing it. And this is why lower lat training becomes a kind of filter. The impatient lifters, the ones who can't stand the idea of doing anything less than max weight, they'll skip it every time. They'll justify it by saying, I hit the lats with pull-ups, that's enough, or barbell rows cover everything. And they'll never fix the flatness in their backs because they're unwilling to do the unglamorous work. The disciplined lifters, the ones who understand that bodybuilding or just building a complete physique is about consistency in the boring details, they're the ones who stick with the lower lat movements week after week. In 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the road, their backs look completely different. Here's another reason this work gets skipped. It requires humility. Most people don't want to admit that they need to use less weight to hit a muscle properly. Precision means dropping the load and controlling the rip. Nobody likes that. The ego craves heavy dumbbell rows, where you're basically doing a full body heave. But ask that same lifter to tuck their elbow, pull smoothly toward their hip, and actually feel the lat contract, and suddenly the stack has to come down by half. And that's when the excuses start. This is too light to matter. But what matters isn't the load, it's the tension in the right muscle fibers. The lower lats don't care how much iron you're moving. They care whether the resistance matches their function. That's it. What you have to accept is that lower lat development is a long game. You won't see it after one workout, maybe not even after 1 month. But stick with it, and the changes creep in. You'll notice your torso starts looking different in the mirror, narrower waist, wider taper. You'll notice the way shirts hang differently, tighter across the sides and back. And eventually, when you take that shirt off, you see that the back isn't just wide, it's full. That 3D look didn't happen by accident. It came from those sessions where you chose precision over ego, boring over flashy, consistency over laziness. And let's be blunt, 99% of lifters will never get there because they'll keep skipping this. They'll keep choosing the lifts that make them look strong today instead of the lifts that make them look impressive a year from now. They'll keep hammering the same heavy basics and wondering why their back development has stalled. That's fine, it's their choice. But if you want to separate yourself from that 99%, then you need to commit to being in the 1% who actually do the lower lat work. The ones who take the time to execute straight arm pull downs properly, who program in the unglamorous one-arm cable pulls, who train with technique so precise it feels tedious, that's the work that builds the detail, and that's the detail that makes you stand out. So the takeaway is simple. The exercises that bias the lower lats don't feel sexy. They don't let you load huge weights, and they don't impress the guy next to you in the gym. But they're the secret to building a back that isn't just wide, but complete, one that looks powerful from every angle. And if you're willing to swallow your pride, set aside your ego, and grind through the boring stuff, your back will look like it belongs to someone who knew exactly what they were doing all along.